Hey, welcome to CS Connect Bible U. I'm Pat. Today we're going to talk about the most important verse. If I were to ask a group, what is the most important verse in the Bible, you can imagine how many different answers I would get. I wonder if we asked Jesus that same question, what he may say. If we asked him, what is the most important verse in the Bible? We don't have to wonder about his answer because, in fact, Jesus was asked this question. In Mark chapter 12, a group of religious leaders approached Jesus and understand that at this time, for hundreds of years, they had been wrestling, rabbis and religious leaders have been wrestling with what is the most important commandment. There were 613 commands in the Torah or in the Old Testament, and they would argue what's the most important, what's the least important. Well, Jesus will basically quote part of Deuteronomy chapter 6, 4 through 9. And then he surprises everyone by adding Leviticus 19 to it. So Jesus is essentially saying this, if you remember the story. These two commands, love God and love others, sum up all the law. What's important and interesting to understand is that part of Jesus' response to their question would not have surprised any of them. You see, by this time in Jewish history, they had taken on quoting what they referred to as the Shema, every morning and every night. The Shema was generally the first thing a child would learn, which means it was not only some of the first words a child would utter as a Jew, as a Hebrew, but then for the rest of their life, they would quote these words at least twice a day, every morning and every night. So what is the Shema? The Shema was originally a handful of verses from Deuteronomy, but would later take on a few additional verses. It was called the Shema because in Hebrew, the first word was, can you guess? Shema. The beginning of the Shema is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, and in Hebrew it reads, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. In English, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. As I mentioned, there were other parts added, but this first part was so important that to this day, when devout Jews quote it, remember every morning and every night, they cover their eyes for this first portion to focus on its importance. Why do they do this? Because these 6 words were and still are considered the most essential declaration to the Jewish faith. These 6 words were and still are considered to be the foundation of all other truths. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Wow! Now I get that some of you are thinking, okay, interesting, but so what? What does all this Jewish history have to do with me today? Oh, the answer is everything. The answer is so important that once you get it, you're going to see this Shema hidden all over the New Testament. In fact, once you get the significance of these 6 Hebrew words, I think you may, like me, start quoting it for yourself on a daily basis. Okay, back to the question asked Jesus. This religious leader asked Jesus about the greatest commandment, and it's important to remember that they are surrounded predominantly by a Jewish audience, which means that morning, every one of them would have quoted, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. When Jesus begins his answer to the question, he's quoting what they all said just hours before and had been saying every day of their lives. No surprises there. So the surprise was he added a portion from Leviticus about loving your neighbor. Why did he do that? Well, that's another lesson for another day. So the question for us today is, why have the Jews for nearly 3,000 years considered this the most important verse, the foundational truth that everything else is built on? First, it's important to understand that the ancient Hebrew language only contains about 8,000 words. Compare that to the 100,000 plus words in the English language, and that's not a lot of words. If a language only has 8,000 words, each of those words will carry multiple meanings based on context. At least 2 of the 6 words in the Shema hold this characteristic. The first word, Shema, is interpreted hear, but it is also interpreted listen, hear, heed, obey, which is interesting because it implies that if we really hear something, we will put it into practice. Another great insight that we could unpack, but that too is for another day. What I want to do is jump to the last word of those 6 Hebrew words found in Hebrews chapter 6, or Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, echad, translated one. So here's what's so interesting. Survey the Old Testament, which, remember, was written in Hebrew, and you will find this Hebrew word, echad, is used many times and in many ways. One as in singular, meaning there's only one. Sometimes it's one as in more than one, becoming one. That's how it's used in Genesis 2:24. The husband and wife become one flesh. In Numbers 13:25, there's one cluster of grapes. Sometimes it's used one as in first. That's how it's used in Genesis, the morning and evening of the first day. Sometimes it's used as one as the same, used with Pharaoh's dreams, where he had several dreams that were one and the same. Okay, so what does the word in Deuteronomy 6:4 mean then, if it's used in 4 different ways? Is it one as in first in order? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. One as in order, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is it meaning before anything and anyone? Is it one as in importance, meaning first place, second place, third place, meaning that God is one as in he's above anything and anyone? Is it one as in only? There is only one God. This is monotheism versus polytheism. Is it one as in 3 in 1, that there's the triunity? All of those are used in this word in different places in the Bible. But what does it mean in Deuteronomy 6:4? Which is it? For 3,000 years, there's been a lot of debate about this, but I think the answer is yes. What do you mean yes? I mean, yes, it means all 4 of those, which is no wonder that the Shema is considered the most important verse, because it lays the foundation for everything else. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. God is the one true God. There is no other. God is before anything and anyone. God is above anything and anyone. Echad. This is important because if everything starts and ends with him, then we might say he is beyond any force. Stay with me. And if he is beyond any force, then he is complete and unchanging. Okay, stay here. If he's unchanging, he's not a consolidation of things, then he's fully and completely whatever he is. So what does this practically mean? It means that God is the perfection of love. He's the perfection of justice. He's the perfection of holiness. He's the perfection of kindness. He's the perfection of grace. He's the perfection of mercy. He's not fair today and unfair tomorrow. He's not just today and unjust tomorrow. He's not loving today and a mean tyrant tomorrow. Truth doesn't change. Justice doesn't change. Holiness doesn't change. Right and wrong doesn't change, because God does not change. Why? Because Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. There's a reason that for thousands of years, the Shema is seen as the foundational truth. It establishes God as pure, all-powerful, unchanging, all-knowing, and ever-present. It means that God is the standard for all times and morality. You really want your mind blown? When you read the Gospels or the letters Paul wrote, watch how often the idea of the Shema is inferred. As you read parts of the Bible, those parts of the Bible, remind yourself that almost anyone who was there was part of a Jewish audience. Most of those Jesus dealt with were in a Jewish audience. They would have quoted it that morning. And you're going to find that Jesus and Paul and Peter and other writers often connected to this idea. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Perhaps the most important verse of the Bible.
Oh,